I wrote an article for the NT News a couple of weeks back that nuclear is probably not for the Territory. Quite often the Chamber's view is my view.
Okay.
And we do have various committees that contribute to the Chamber, so it's not all about me.
Yep.
And I think that's a bit dangerous if it's all about me. In all honesty, when we look back at previous election campaign wants, the picture hasn't really changed too much. Crime's very much on the agenda and probably very much top of the list still.
Right. Greg Ireland, thanks for joining us on the Next Gen North podcast.
You're very welcome, Stuart. This is a new experience for me, so I apologise in advance for anything that might happen.
Well, we'll see how we go. What's the feeling on the ground currently with the members of the Chamber? What's the outlook at the moment?
It's a bit of a mixed bag, Stuart. There's businesses out there that are feeling quite confident. You know, we know that the construction sector is still pushing the Territory economy or keeping us breaking even is probably the best way to state it after the ComSec report that came out a day or two ago.
Yep.
And that's going to continue. We know that defence, both Australian and US defence, is going to be spending on average about $1 billion a year in construction sector activity here.
Yep.
That's a really, really positive thing and gives some certainty. And whilst probably 40% of that money is committed into real projects, about 60% is still contested.
Okay.
And we could be losing it, but we've got to work pretty hard to make sure that they honour their commitments and spend it here in the Northern Territory.
So is that federal money, is that really going to filter down to the ground level, the grassroots type operators, or is it, sometimes those bigger projects, they get stolen by interstate companies and that sort of thing? Do you see some real benefit being delivered at the lower levels here?
Historically, that was very much a problem with the defence spend. In more recent times, organisations, particularly the Master Builders Association, have done a lot of work with defence, starting with the defence ministers over various iterations of government to make sure that Territory locals get an opportunity. So what they did was split the package sizes into something a lot more manageable.
Yep.
When you're a Territory business trying to fund a $500 or $600 million project is pretty challenging, and it really is only the big national players that can deliver something like that.
Yep.
But when you break it into $400 or $500 million packages, well, Territory business can manage that, and they were very keen to work together. So the likes of Sitzler's and other large installation companies really got stuck into some of those projects, and a lot of that has filtered through local business.
Yep. Yeah, we had Ben Carter just before his depart. Well, actually, he'd already departed, I think, Master Builders, and he gave us a good oil on that. I think it just splitting those packages, it sort of limits or mitigates local businesses having to do JVs and that sort of thing, doesn't it? They can sort of apply on their own merits to win work packages. Is that right?
Yeah, funding a $100 million project is still a significant commitment for a local business, and I think when you go down the food chain in terms of the third, fourth and fifth tier organisations, there's still opportunity for Territory businesses to JV on some of these things. It is complex, and they potentially are working with competitors on a day-to-day basis. But I think if it means that you can deliver something that you normally can't, it's worth the investment because you'll learn a lot.
Yep. So you mentioned the ComSec report earlier, which I really want to get into a bit later on, but we like to learn a little bit about our guest's own personal journey. So Greg Ireland, where are you from originally? Are you a Territorian born and bred, or are you a blow-in? Where have you? What's your journey look like?
Yeah, I'm one of those Mexicans that came up from South, and in this case from Adelaide, born and bred in South Australia. Came up here. This is year 28 for me here.
Yep.
Came up here on a 3-year program with the company that I was working for at the time. My background's electronic security. I started in the technical world as an apprentice, and I guess escalated over time into project management, and ultimately came up here as the branch manager for one of the large multinational companies.
Wow.
3 or 4 years here turned into 6 or 7 through a few changes in their management structure, and ultimately I decided that the opportunity for me was outside of that organisation. Left there and started our own business.
Okay.
Doing electronic security because that's kind of all I knew.
Yep.
That turned into a company called Security and Technology Services, which we I guess, roped in quite a number of friends and people from the industry that we knew were good quality people.
Sure.
Provided them an opportunity to own part of their own businesses. So we created what we like to call a franchise rather than a franchise.
Yep.
And started in Katherine, then Alice Springs, then Adelaide, then Queensland. And we ended up with about 100 staff around the country, with 60 of them here. We did a lot of work overseas, did a lot of work all over the country from Darwin, which is pretty unusual.
Yep.
Did that for 15 or 16 years and then sold that about 5 years ago.
Okay.
During that journey, I ended up representing the Chamber of Commerce on the board through one of our employees who decided it was a really good idea to be on the Chamber board, got himself elected, and then resigned and went to a government job, as a lot of people do up here.
Sure.
And that left a vacancy, and I kind of stepped in.
Yep.
Didn't really know what the Chamber was and too much about it, but I thought it'd be a good experience for me.
Yep.
A couple of years later, I found myself as the chair, or as they like to call it, the president of the Chamber.
Okay.
Pretty interesting because I'd turn up in shorts and work boots and have conversations with politicians and stuff that I wasn't really familiar with. So it was a pretty interesting journey.
Well, it sounds like you've had some real actual business experience, which I think is somewhat lacking, particularly with politicians these days.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were a bit unique, having a lot of national work. I was travelling a lot. Back in the days, I'd be literally on a plane around the country once a week.
Yep.
And visiting projects in Tasmania or off the coast of Perth. And
wow.
We did a lot of work in Christmas Island. We bought a house over there. Still got a unit in Derby.
Derby, that's where my partner's from.
It's a wonderful spot, Derby. our place looks over the mud flat there. It's great. Look, it's certainly been a journey. But when you were, our sales are probably averaging 25 to 30 million a year. Peaked at 50. We were doing some pretty significant work. So you can have conversations that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have when you didn't have those kind of activities going on.
Sure.
And when you can invite people to a building and they see 50 or 60 people working there,
yep.
It creates quite an impression around town. So not that we exploited that in any real way, we just were focused on delivering a quality outcome and doing the job properly.
Right.
And my view is if you do that and you represent yourself appropriately and honestly, and whatever the problem is, you fix it, people are going to come back and you get repeat business.
So when did you actually join the Chamber then? What was the year?
Well, another interesting story. The Chamber had a tenure of 5 years as chair,
right?
Constitutionally, and it got to my 5 years and they couldn't find anyone else that wanted to do it, so they varied the Constitution for an extra year.
Okay.
I volunteered to do an extra year. So
that sounds like it's straight out of the People's Republic of China playbook, that one.
It does a bit, but when you couldn't find a volunteer, it makes it a bit difficult. So we set about doing so. It just so happened that the CEO resigned during that 6th year of my tenure, and I'd finished with my business having sold it. So I was at a little bit of a loose end. He resigned. I stuck my hand up and said, I'll do 3 months helping out while there's a recruitment process going on. I had to finish anyway, so we did that. It turned out that was 2 weeks before I'd heard the word COVID.
I was going to ask, because it sounds like those sort of timelines were in parallel.
Yeah, so all of a sudden everything changed, the world changed, the Chamber had to react. We got dragged into some pretty significant support activities by government for Territory business. All of a sudden, any doors that we were struggling to open previously were way open, and we could just walk through them and talk to people that we hadn't spoken to for quite some time.
Wow.
That was really helpful from a relationship build perspective for me very, very quickly.
Sure.
Probably accelerated that reconciliation process for some of our previous errors quite substantially.
It must have been liberating, though, not having those sort of shackles on anymore, in a sense.
Well, when you're talking to chief ministers and things just have to be done, and you're meeting, almost 4 hourly online to react to various things that are occurring.
Yep.
It certainly does facilitate some positive conversations or some robust conversations around outcomes. And that's, as I was pointed out before, one of the things that we were really focused on was what do we need to do, and let's get it done.
Yep.
So that was encouraging. That process in itself took 12 months minimum. And during that time, you start to look at the rest of the business and go, that's actually broken too, and that can be done a lot better, and let's look at this a different way, and our systems aren't really doing it for us. All of a sudden, the project list got fairly significant, and when the board went to market for a CEO, I decided to stick my hat in the ring. They went through a full process and through a recruitment agency and interviewed quite a number of people.
Yep.
I think having 100 plus applicants for the role. And they offered it to me, so here I am.
Yep. So can you just tell us or tell our audience a little bit about what the chamber does for those not aware, what you guys do, what's your function, what's your role, your structure, that type of thing?
So the Northern Territory Chambers are a little different to many of the other Chamber of Commerces around Australia in particular.
Yep.
Chambers of Commerce have been active in the world for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yep.
We've only been around since 1962, I think it is.
Okay.
And up here. But for the uninitiated, my first comment is consider us the union for employers.
Okay.
Now, we don't behave necessarily like the CFMEU or some others out
I
there.
hope not. I hope not.
But we certainly are very strong in representing all of business, and our slogan is the voice of Territory business.
Okay.
And that's what we want to be. We want to be people that are having conversations on behalf of Territory business, mum and dad businesses, which is 90+% of Territory businesses.
Is that the focus, the smaller end of the scale, or are you a voice sort of for everyone?
We're a voice for everybody,
Okay.
but you might appreciate that the bigger the business, perhaps the less they need us.
Sure.
And particularly in the Territory where you can run into the Chief Minister doing shopping at Woolies and have a good chat and down the markets or
Well,
whatever.
just like I said just previously, I just saw Paul Henderson walking down the corridor here, so you just never know who you're going to run into.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those people, past or present, have some influence in some of those conversations. So, you'll be surprised how quickly your story ends up in the ear of somebody that matters.
Yep.
If you've got a reasonable story to be telling. So, Territory business doesn't necessarily need us at some of those levels. They supply their own services. They've got their own internal industrial relations staff and all that sort of thing.
Yep.
But what they do want to do is support an industry or an organisation that supports the grassroots of Territory business. So we look at it at a sort of more of a philanthropic level.
Okay.
And some of those bigger businesses to say, you need this ecosystem around you. You need that for multiple reasons, even if it's just servicing and supporting your employees that you're bringing to town. When you look at some of the big projects that are coming, we will be bringing thousands of workers to the Territory over time. They need all the support industries, the hairdressers, the mechanics, the panel beaters, all that stuff.
Yep.
And whilst those businesses are not all members of the chamber, every conversation we have influences outcomes on all businesses. So, one of our election wish lists that has come about recently has been around payroll tax.
Okay.
We can't quite see the logic in taxing businesses that employ more people.
Yep.
Doesn't make sense to us. It never has.
It's one of the only taxes that the Territory really has control over, isn't it? In terms of employment and that side of things.
Pretty much. And it is a significant revenue raiser for government, and they like it.
Is that right?
About 160 million a year comes out of payroll tax revenue. And we don't necessarily disagree that the larger end of town on these big projects, they can factor that into
pay their
the cost of doing business.
Yep.
But when you're that sort of enterprise that's crossing the barrier of about 15 staff, you start to pay payroll tax, and you end up paying $55,000 a year to government in tax, which I know when I was in business, that money was much more useful to me investing back into the business.
Absolutely.
Than it was paying a government tax. And it allows you to be more competitive, allows you to employ more Territorians and increase our population count. and that's what the territory needs. You know, at 140, 150,000 in the territory, or
Yep.
250,000 in the territory.
Yep.
Our economics just doesn't stack up
Yep.
when you divide the square kilometres. You know, and that's an interesting conversation when you meet someone from overseas to explain how that we measure people per square kilometre, not the other way around.
Yeah. I think the CLP have said that they were going to, I don't know if it was abolished, but they were going to definitely have a hard look at that tax.
Yeah.
Has Labor made the same pledge, or have any other of the political parties, whether it be the Greens or Independents or anyone like that, have they made that same pledge?
No, to date it's only been the CLP, and they've adopted our recommendation of lifting the threshold from 1.5 mil to 2.5 mil.
Okay.
That provides that sort of $55,000 relief for a business. Labor's view is that's eroding that revenue opportunity, and how would that be replaced? Well, our view is it would be replaced with the increased activity. The
Sure.
more these bigger projects are coming to town, we know that that's going to happen.
Yep.
I think their payroll tax take will increase regardless, but it will create an opportunity for business to reinvest in itself at that grassroots level.
Yep. So just getting back to the chamber itself, in terms of its model and its ability to sort of sustain itself, how you guys fund it? Is it a membership fee model? Do you guys have sponsorship? Is it government money? Is it a mix of all of those things? How do you guys sustain yourselves so you're able to prosecute your own agenda?
That's a great question. I'm asked that a lot, and it very much is a mix of all of the above.
Yep.
What I would say is that membership is crucially important to us. It is what puts fuel in our tank to enable us to deliver more outcomes. So I also tell people that we're a not-for-profit, and we're particularly good at it. So my view is that being a not-for-profit, and trust me, this is the first one I've been involved in, so it's been a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah.
Is to reinvest any surplus back into outcomes, deliver better services, deliver better models, deliver better outcomes and visibility for business. One of the key things that I did when I first started was jump in front of microphones and in front of TV cameras, and trust me, I'm not a natural public-faced person. Definitely not even sure my voice is fit for radio, to be honest. But it's about that awareness. If you're doing these things quietly in the background and people don't know about it, well, how do they see value in that? Okay. So we changed our membership model quite substantially. It went from a model that was based on employee numbers.
Okay.
The more you employed, the more you paid.
Yep.
Funnily enough, the more you employed, the less you needed us.
Yeah.
So we had to have a look at that model. We reduced our point of entry so reduce the price for a smaller business to get involved.
Okay.
And we increased the price for bigger businesses who wished to participate at that level to support business. And it becomes that sort of philanthropic type thing. And we've still got a bit of a way to go, but it certainly does. It is the thing that enables us to have better resources internally. And internal resources and quality of people is something that we've really focused on as well.
Yep.
On top of that, we have about 100 events a year, and we had one last week. We had 170 Territorians at a breakfast to listen to the Fair Work Commission and the Fair Work Ombudsman talk about the recent industrial relations changes.
Right.
Fantastic event, high quality people. Our view is not to make a lot of money off those things, but we want to make sure we're educating, and it's part of our model.
Yep.
We have in-house industrial relations team that work on all sorts of HR and IR based issues.
Yep.
Members get discounted rates, so we always encourage people to be a member to access those rates, and we provide support between initial issue and any legal activity, and we do that at a rate that's more competitive than a legal firm, and and operate in a particularly technical skill area that's hard to find. So we do a lot of the grunt work. We make sure you're not underpaying anyone. With, again, recent change and the criminalisation of wage theft, you don't want to be underpaying anyone. You also want to make sure that you're compliant with all of the changes to the awards and legislation. So our people sift through that with a fine-tooth comb. You remember the old H&R block ads where the accountant punched in the air when they submitted a tax return? Well, our team punched the air when they sort out an industrial relations issue.
Yep.
For me, I'd rather be watching a video on tying a new fishing knot, but that's another story.
So it's an election year, obviously, and we're almost in the month of the election. So what do you personally and the chamber see as the sort of main hot button issues going into this election? What is the membership feel? Is it the economy? Is it crime, cost of living? What are the sort of the hot button issues that you think are going to sort of shape this year's election?
Well, you've actually just nailed pretty much all of them.
Okay.
You probably should work at the chamber.
Let's go home. We're done here.
No, so we ended up forming a committee specifically around our election wants and points of priority.
Have you publicly released a wish list?
We certainly have.
Okay.
So that's all over our website, been supplied to the politicians and all the relevant parties. It has had some take up with some of those policies that we were talking about earlier, such as the payroll tax.
Yep.
They have also looked at housing support, construction support payments, and other things that we were looking for. But in all honesty, when we look back at previous election campaign wants, the picture hasn't really changed too much.
Is that right?
Crime's very much on the agenda and probably very much top of the list still.
Right.
But there's enough focus on crime from all sorts of different particular areas, and my view is that that will have to take care of itself.
Yep.
And some tough decisions will need to be made, and some long-term policies put in place. But my focus is very much the business community and the settings needed for them to operate, making the assumption that we resolve some of the crime-related stuff. There is some normality comes back to a lot of the regional areas, and we can get on with doing business. And business is just challenged by those costs that we were talking about in the construction sector before, where just insurance is through the roof. Just the cost of materials in manufacturing has gone through the roof worldwide. Our logistics are challenged and influenced by seasonal variations. We're just an expensive place to do business. And that, I think, again, reflects back to the ComSec report saying, we're really challenged with growth. We know that a single incident, such as a ship damaging a wharf in Groote Island, has made a significant measurable difference to our gross domestic product results. We are highly influenced by single activity outcomes, and floods and cyclones and those things can certainly hurt us. So, we need to be mindful that we spread the eggs in more than one basket. And mining and resources is currently top of our list in terms of revenue for the territory.
Yep. So just in terms of the cost of supplies for building materials and that type of thing, both of the major parties have released policies, for first home owners and first time builders and that sort of thing. I think it's 50,000 for the CLP, and Labor said 60,000 for, I think, territory-based builders. How do you see that type of thing? Is that what the chamber asked for, or do you see that type of stimulus as just another factor that's just going to overheat an already hot Australian property market? Maybe less so the territory, as is not, the real estate's not performing as well here. But how do you sort of see those type of policy initiatives going forward?
Look, I think there's room for them.
Yep.
They are, in my view, a short-term outcome. We need to be looking at longer-term fixes and actually fixing the issue. So when the freight is costing huge amounts to come up because the volumes are so limited, we're not utilising our rail network anywhere enough. We're not importing enough product from overseas through Darwin Port. All of those things will start to really make a substantial difference on some of the logistical costs and open up more economic opportunity for territory business when we look to our north. Insurance, particularly workers' compensation, all of our stats are based on a very small pool. So it's very, very difficult for insurance companies to spread risk, and therefore we pay more. So there's a number of settings there that are being talked about. We congratulate the federal government on the cyclone reinsurance, which a lot of people possibly haven't heard of, but it effectively means that when you declare a cyclone, the federal government takes over the insurance off the insurance company.
Wow.
And it's a $10 billion fund, but I believe there's unlimited payout requirements on that.
Yep.
And it exists for 48 hours after that cyclone ceases to be a cyclone.
That's a huge indemnity, isn't it? Like
It's massive, and it has made a significant difference to homeowners in terms of insurance costs, to business in terms of insurance costs, and that's a fantastic thing.
Yep.
What they have forgotten to do is look at the flood risk that occurs after that.
Right, storm surge.
Yep. Well, storm surge typically during a cyclone, but rivers flooding and say the Catherine flood, for example, occurred more than 48 hours after the cyclone moniker, I think it was, impacted.
Right.
And that's not insured. So there's another federal parliamentary committee being formed to look at the consequential flood damage associated with that, and that'd be an important thing for the Territory. It cuts our roads, it damages lots and lots of property and that sort of thing. So there is progress, it's just slow.
Yep. Cost of living. Do you think the Territory government is doing enough to help Territorians with cost of living? I mean, I know there's not a lot of levers that we can really pull, but things like utility costs that we do have some control over. Are we doing enough? Could we do more? How do you sort of see things?
I've been quite involved in the conversations, particularly around utility and electricity costs.
Yep.
And we all love renewables and we want to see as much as possible in the network, but the renewables are also destabilising the network. Our network is ageing quite considerably.
Yep.
And there's new technologies coming to bear that will certainly assist in more viable running of our grid. I mean, when you look at the Darwin-Catherine grid, it's a micro grid when you compare it to others around the country. And that ageing infrastructure is going to be challenging to maintain over time, and it's going to be expensive. We transmit power a long way. So there's some challenges involved with that. The government already spends a considerable amount of money providing discounts off insurance, subsidising electrical costs.
Sure.
So we've just seen 3.5% to 4% increase for consumers on the back of an increase in the support obligation that the government provides. So you can imagine what an increase would have been if that subsidy wasn't available.
Yep.
You've got to bear in mind that that's only for domestic users and small business.
Okay.
If you're a large business, you don't get that support. So your power's gone up 10 to 12% this year.
So it makes it hard for manufacturers and industrial sort of.
So if you make cement here in the Territory, which is huge electrical costs, if you're a galvaniser, if you're a large scale producer in any way, your costs are going through the roof, and that's a real concern for the future, and that's why we believe Territory supplied gas and the contracts that are currently being signed, and we heard another announcement this week around gas supply from the Beetaloo and other locations coming to the Territory government is a very, very positive thing in our view. Gas has got to be that transition and stabilising source for some period of time, and there is technology coming that can make those gas power generations effectively net zero from day one.
So is the Chamber's position that it's pro-gas officially, or is that just how you see things? I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit.
That's another great question. Quite often the Chamber's view is my view.
Okay.
And we do have various committees that contribute to the Chamber, so it's not all about me. And I think that's a bit dangerous if it's all about me. But and that's represented by businesses in regions. So we have an Alice Springs committee, a very, very active committee down there, Tennant Creek, Catherine, Nullarbor, and obviously the top end represented through our board. But we take it further than that. We break it into industry sectors. So we run what we call industry councils with manufacturing, international business, maritime and defence. And those sectors are what we consider to be the key drivers for industry moving forward. And very much hands-on in terms of people making widgets and producing goods for the Territory. So we get a lot of input and feedback from those committees that help me form an opinion. But the reality, I think, is that we're going to need gas for a period of time. And when you look at the statistics and the logic behind it, I think for the betterment of business and the opportunities for business into the future, we need to be looking at that as our solution, pending what technology comes next.
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation because gas gets talked about as a transition fuel. All right, so we take that on its merits. The transition to then what? Does that mean renewables get such a high rate of penetration that's what we're transitioning to, which has its own questions about baseload power, about being able to sustain a manufacturing economy, that sort of thing? Is it nuclear? That we transition to, because that's a carbon mitigating technology, but it comes with its own obviously concerns. What is it, 3 Mile Island and Fukushima and all that, those sort of conversations around the negative aspects of nuclear. To me, the next step doesn't really get answered. It's always about, we've got a transition fuel to what? So how do you sort of see things post-transition, I'll say?
Yeah, look, again, I don't think the answer to that is particularly known at this point in time. I wrote an article for the NT News a couple of weeks back that nuclear is probably not for the territory.
Okay.
The reality is that a physical nuclear plant at scale is just way too big for our needs.
Right.
There are other opportunities, and even a micro reactor, which don't really exist yet in any feasible way, is still too big for us. Mm-hmm. So we can't deploy them remotely, all those sorts of things. But the gas scenario buys us time. Mm-hmm. So through carbon sequestering, done a little bit of research on carbon capture and storage, and the fact is that
that's a pretty new technology, though. Still, isn't it? Pretty
been happening for 40 years.
But is it cost effective, and is it scalable?
Short answer is it's getting better.
Okay.
So there's 40 plus capture facilities around the world, and they're currently capturing 0.4 gigatons of carbon.
Yep.
To make the world carbon neutral right now, you'd have to be capturing 4 gigatons. So there's a way to go in ramping up that carbon capture and storage. Australia's got the biggest carbon capture and storage facility in the world, in Gorgon, off the coast of WA. And the two that are proposed here by Santos and Impex will both be bigger than those. So we'll have the 3 biggest capture facilities. It's my understanding that carbon, when it goes into the ground, wants to stay in the ground. It came from underground, and it actually over time solidifies into basically a rock.
Is that right?
So once it's settled and once it's been there a while, it's quite happy to spend that time.
What sort of time scale is that?
That's a great question. I believe we're talking quite a few years, and it can sort of seep around in the layers underneath the ground. But once it's been there for a bit, it solidifies and turns into some sort of physical structure.
Right. I wasn't aware of that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's some interesting technology when you start to dig into it a bit. Pardon the pun.
So just quickly, does then that negate the need to go to big batteries or massive scale solar, wind, that type of thing? Do you think?
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, when we look at batteries are seen as the stabilising solution at the moment, and that is absolutely the case. Very, very expensive lithium technology. There's new battery technologies being talked about. We're even producing them potentially here at Middle Arm ourselves. So batteries will be part of that mix, but generation that can be started and stopped whenever it needs to compensate for clouds and other less windy days or whatever the other renewable is. So ramp them up and down on demand, but also have them running and having their carbon captured and sequestered in our local facilities would effectively make us net zero.
Yep.
It's not a renewable solution, but it's very much an interim solution for a problem that will be replaced by technology, and it might be a little star in a box that someone invents one day. Who knows what that is? But I think we need to buy the time, and we know that we've got a considerable resource there. It's really an economic game changer for the territory through the royalty factors.
Yep.
If we want to start closing gaps and providing access to Territorians 24/7, 12 months of the year to remote locations, we need some cash.
Yeah. So it's an interesting point you just raised regarding royalties, because I understand that Impex, because it was sort of offshore in Commonwealth waters, I think, for a lack of a better description, the territory couldn't actually demand that Impex pay royalties to the territory government. The federal government could have asked for those royalties, but it didn't. Is that now changing in your mind, or have we, with the onshore stuff, is the government taking a better approach in terms of money that filters back into the territory's coffers with, I think it's Tamboran and these type? Yeah. So are things changing in that space?
Yeah, look, I think you're partly right around Impex. We don't receive any royalties. The federal government does.
Oh, they do.
And I think West Australia did a bit of a deal with the feds to clip the ticket on the way through, because it all comes out of Western Australia side and gets piped around.
Right.
We all remember the Paul Henderson, Claire Martin Claire's trip to Tokyo to steal the deal.
I've had her on this podcast and she told that story. So,
yep. So West Australian government got their nose out of joint a bit around that, but that's business at the end of the day. There is federal income through the Impex activity, and that is effectively the way it works for every offshore facility. It's all federal royalties.
Yep.
For the territory to get royalties, it's got to come from underground on onshore.
Yep.
And there's a significant resource. I mean, we're talking about the third biggest basin in the world, and from what we're hearing on the test results, it's certainly some good quality.
Is it as good as they're saying it is? Do you know?
Apparently, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Apparently, it's very, very clean, very low carbon, very dry, which means that we're not trying to separate oils and bits and pieces. When you go over to Texas and have a look at some of the infrastructure that they've got to do what they have to do, we don't have to do anywhere near that level of work. So,
right.
And when you look at the scale of the industrial activity around that project, it's huge. And this is not going to be too far behind it. Possibly not the same scale, but it's all going to happen remotely, which gives it a little bit more of a logistic challenge.
Yep.
But it's great opportunities for territory business. It's a great opportunity for the territory government to have a revenue stream that supplements some of the challenges that we've got, particularly around closing gaps and getting Indigenous participation and very much local participation through all these activities. If that builds our population by 50 or 60,000 and builds our workforce by 20 or 30,000,
yep,
that's just a huge difference. We're talking about currently a workforce of about 130,000 in the territory, contributing workers.
Yep.
That's a 15-20% increase, 20% thereabouts.
Yep.
It's a big game changer in just the flow of dollars around the economy and that circular activity that takes place.
Yep. So do you see, with the advent of the onshore gas, do you see it driving utilities prices down? Because I think we hear a lot of talk from politicians about, renewables bringing the cost of utilities down. And it seems like from the numbers I've seen the world over, where renewables penetration gets higher and so does the cost of utilities. Do you see that the development of Beetaloo driving utilities costs down to then spur manufacturing and things like that, like industry?
So
is that the hope?
It's a bit of a mixed bag in responding to that. I think what we talked about in generation and transmission challenges that the territory has, we're probably not going to see those prices shift down in any tangible way, but
even stabilise
is what we've got to be looking for. Have them not going up at the rate that they're going up. Is what the target should be there. But energy is not just about electricity. Gas is used to to make hydrogen. Gas is used
Fertilizer.
to make fertilizer. Gas is used to make steel.
Yep.
All of those things are real possibilities in the territory, and the gas can be delivered much cheaper than the electricity can.
Yep.
So I think there's a bit of a mixed result there.
Yeah, okay. Industrial relations. So I think there was an act passed 2022. I think it was called Secure Jobs, Better Pay.
Same job, better pay.
Same job, is it?
No, same job, same pay.
Okay.
Better get that right.
All right.
Yep.
How have you seen those industrial relations, that legislation, what sort of impact has that had on territory businesses in the last couple of years, year and a half?
Again, a bit of a mixed bag. There's an entry point for a lot of those legislation changes. So you've got to be 15 staff or more, which is a smaller percentage of territory businesses that a lot of this gets applied to.
Yep.
But the reality is that as your business grows, at some point you'll be hoping to exceed that number anyway. If you're not structured and operating in that kind of way, then it's a very difficult thing to implement later. So
Yep.
territory business that has aspirations is going to be looking to comply with all of that. It's been followed by the closing the loopholes legislation, which has come in two tranches. One that came into effect last year, and one that's coming into effect late August, where all of those particular challenges are being brought into legislation, and territory business needs to be fully cognizant of what those responsibilities are and make sure they're compliant with it. I was talking on the ABC radio a short time ago and saying if the risk of you going to jail means that you've got to double check that you're paying everyone properly, I'd suggest you check that you're paying everyone properly and make sure that that's absolutely the case. The Chamber can offer those services as do many other locations that can double check that for you, but ignorance is no excuse.
Yep. So there's changes to I think it's the definition of an employer and an employee and that sort of thing. There's also changes to the approach to what a casual worker is, and their pathway to either part-time work or full-time work. How do you see that change? Because to me, it sort of seems like the government is almost allowing employees to dictate to employers what type of employment status they hold, which to me sort of is a bit of a red flag. Businesses don't like being told how to operate their own business. Are there any sort of negative consequences you see? Are there, what are the positives in that type of thing being introduced?
As a former business owner, and who knows what happens in the future, might be back in that game again one day. Your focus is cost control. If you're not managing your costs, you put yourself at risk, and it's very easy to spend money. It's much harder to make money. So you have to have control over that, and there's various mechanisms, and some of those are being eroded through these particular legislation changes, and it does make it more difficult to be in business. And it effectively means if you're having to pay for somebody who's not producing an outcome, then you've really got to look seriously about how you structure that into the future. And
or whether you continue to exist as a business.
Yeah. Well, the Australian Chamber's literally just released some small business survey results, and something like 45% of small businesses in Australia are considering closing their doors.
That's staggering.
If things get worse, and in regional Australia, that number's over 50%.
God.
So you can see the uncertainty that these changes are making, particularly in small to medium businesses who are just saying it's just now too risky. My house is on the line, my kids' future's on the line. I can't take this risk anymore.
Yep.
And not everyone is a large business with stable income streams. We've seen what COVID's done to business, the drop of a hat.
Yep.
If something like that happens again, those businesses are very much at risk. So, I think it needs to have due consideration on the risk profile that the business owner is taking versus the employee who doesn't want to take a risk on being a casual.
Yep.
But then there's a lot of people out there that just want to work casually because it suits their lifestyle.
Absolutely.
So
you get a 25% loading or whatever it is, and away you go.
yeah, and it needs to be equitable for both sides.
Yep.
You know, business is all about taking risks, but you don't take silly risks. Otherwise, you may as well just bet on the horses or something along of that nature. And
Yep.
I'm certainly not a gambler and not advocating it, but you know, business is about taking a calculated risk and investing for your own future and those that you employ.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that some of these legislation changes are almost, so what I was talking about before with the casual pathway to part-time, you know, it's almost done under the threat of a referral to the Fair Work Commission, which will put the wind up any business owners. So they want to avoid that at all costs. But I think there's a broader point that I see with a lot of these legislative changes is that they're introduced with the best of intentions, but a lot of the time when they're introduced, they put a lot more pressure on your mom and pop stores than they do, like you were saying, with the bigger players that have got, you know, solidified revenue streams and you know, economies of scale, and they can carry those costs. Do you sort of see that as a bit of what I forget the terminology, but like an unintended consequence of these type of you know, IR law changes?
And we certainly don't underestimate protecting workers, you know, from various activities, but it has to maintain a bit of a balance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we're seeing businesses being more and more challenged, and those survey results are, I guess, reflective of of how business is feeling about those particular challenges. So yeah, it's certainly whether it's unintended or not.
Yep.
It's hard to know, but it's the reality that business face, and you know, the political landscape will drive the next steps.
Yep. So with that survey, what were the main factors that businesses were saying, you know, if things don't get much better, we could go to the wall? Is it things like, you know, a raise in interest rates, you know, these regulatory changes? What were the sort of main factors they were worried about?
So inflation's very much on people's radar.
Yeah.
You know, everything's going up, the cost of doing business, as we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the industrial relations changes create that uncertainty and potentially erode their ability to be flexible in their cost management.
Yep.
You know, that's a challenge. Yeah, so all of those things are driving business to feel maybe I'm better off just getting a job somewhere and not having to take that risk.
Yep. The ComSec State of the States report didn't really bode very well for the current government, you know, less than a month out from a general election. Just want to read some statistics. So the Territory's down 7.7% on its long-run average, and I understand that that's somewhat skewed from IMPEX, but I don't know how long we can keep sort of making that excuse, because our annual growth figure is negative 6.7%. Annual housing starts are down almost 40%, and the Territory's in last place in a lot of those statistical categories. How do you sort of see the economy as a whole, and can we turn things around?
Yeah, look, that particular report hasn't provided a positive outlook for the Territory for quite some time, certainly since I've been in this job. And,
Yep.
and whilst I'm not an economist, I kind of look at that and go, when you look at IMPEX, its first gas shipment was in 2018.
Yep.
And given that this is a 10-year averaged outcome, let's assume there was a fair bit of commissioning, so 2017 sometime, construction finished. So it's probably 2027, 28 before
Yep.
the numbers drop out.
That all washes out. Yep.
That particular report. So there's a bit of time to go with a few more adverse outcomes.
Yep.
I think, and if you look at some of those growth numbers that have got some short-term impacts, you know, the cyclone we talked about earlier has had a significant impact, and you look at the Territory budget, you can see that in the future forecasts moving forward.
Yep.
And then they start to factor in some of these other projects that we're talking about, and we can see us getting back to a surplus in, 5 or 6 years. Well, again, there's a lot of positive things that got to happen. And Territory business, as I said earlier, is feeling quite confident around some of these projects. We're actually starting to see, Santos really ramping up their activity, noticeable numbers pushing through the airport to come and service those projects. The drive market through tourism and the cruise boat stuff is remaining reasonably positive, albeit a bit late. So economically, people are feeling reasonably confident, but COVID is still hurting from a balance sheet perspective. Those businesses aren't sitting on big bank balances and saying, okay, I've got all this money, I'm prepared to spend it now.
Yep.
They're actually saying, oh, I'm prepared to spend, but I need some income first. So someone write me a purchase order, someone have a real project that I can do something on.
Yep.
And I'll participate. The risk there is that they don't win the project, or the project gets delayed, or whatever the story is. That business is going to struggle. So I think business has got to be looking at being on the front foot for those projects when they occur.
Yep.
And to build those relationships now and not wait until something actually tangibly happens, because quite often you've missed the boat, somebody else has cut your lunch, so to speak.
So being so close to an election, you mentioned your wish list that you'd released before. But have you liked what you've seen from the major political parties, I guess in particular, about what they're offering to stimulate the economy? Is there more that they should be doing? What areas should they be focusing on so close to the election?
I guess, with them both, one party being on the left and one party being on the right, we're actually seeing relatively conservative views from both, and there's a lot of commonality in the conversation.
When you say conservative, sorry, just quickly, do you mean more centrist, sort of like a lot? Yeah, okay, yep.
So both of them are supporting business and commercial activity in the Territory. I think they both realise without us, getting back to basics and earning more than we spend, we're in trouble. If we can't attract people and keep them here through our, living standards and conditions, we're in trouble. If we can't be teaching our kids appropriately, we're in trouble. If we're not, engaging local business in these activities, things go from bad to worse. So there's a lot of commonality in those conversations, and I think we're going to see very similar outcomes from both parties, and I think that's also leading to what's going to be a pretty close election campaign. The Chamber's doing something a bit different for this election.
Okay.
We haven't done this before, but 3 days prior to the election, or on the Tuesday prior, we've got a national head-to-head debate between Leah and Eva being broadcast live for an hour on Sky News nationally.
Great.
It's a last-minute opportunity for them to get their policies and really explain some of the detail. We want to get right into the detail on that.
Yep.
And Sky News have come to the party and supported it. Some local businesses helping us put it together.
Yep.
It should be a very interesting outcome for us in terms of getting that political agenda clearly articulated in the final few days before the election.
Is that going to be Matt Cunningham? Is he going to be having involvement in that? Is he the usual mediator?
No. Sky's sending up Kieran Gilbert from Canberra.
Great.
Who's very well respected in that place, and I'm sure Matt will be there.
Yep.
I think he's back from the Olympics by then.
Okay. Oh, he's over the Olympics, is he?
I believe so. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good gig.
Yeah, absolutely. Take it when you can get it, for sure. But yeah, we look forward to Kieran moderating that and getting the best outcomes we can for the viewing public around the country. The Territory is an important place for Australia, and being that gateway to Asia is a real significant opportunity for the country as well. So throw the defence lens across that, and there's a lot to be excited about, and the country should be interested in what's happening up here.
So the main conversations of that debate, are they going to be centred around the things we've talked about today? What about things like, no one seems to be talking about voluntary assisted dying and that sort of thing that have sort of been on the agenda previously. I think domestic violence is another one. I haven't really heard much in the way of policy, except actually maybe today it got released. And that seems like it's a huge issue that we need to address, particularly around the crime side of things.
It's an interesting one because the headline today was around bipartisan support for domestic violence. Well, we need more bipartisan support for closing gaps, for anti-crime, collectively get together and create some real outcomes for the territory. So I think politically there's some opportunity for both parties to do that. So that's a good thing. Things like voluntary assisted dying are certainly important issues for the territory, and we were first and now we're last, I think, in that particular
funny that, isn't it?
race. So, and that's everyone's personal view. But from a chamber perspective, we very much focus on the business settings and making sure that we are creating an environment that business can thrive.
Yep. Well, Greg, that's really all the topics of discussion I wanted to talk about. So thank you very much. We usually like to throw to our guests to give them a bit of an opportunity to spruik anything that they've got going on. I don't know if the Chamber's got some events or, like you said, the debate. Is there anything else that people should look out for with the Chamber coming up?
Probably one thing, the Chamber's got a relatively new program around customer service excellence awards and business excellence awards. That's an opportunity for businesses to nominate either themselves or somebody else that's provided them really good service. We're trying to celebrate business in the territory that does a really good job. So that's on our website for people to look at. There's a myriad of things that are occurring all the time. So jump on the Chamber website, have a look at our events. If you're not a member, feel free to become one. We'd love to welcome you to the Chamber family and see what we can do to help your business.
Well, Greg, we really appreciate it, and excuse me. Best of luck with the rest of the year and your time at the Chamber, and all the best. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Stuart.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. See ya.